The clock on Ethan's desk ticked past midnight, the only sound in his small apartment. Rain pelted the window, tiny rivulets tracing chaotic paths down the glass. He rubbed his eyes, fatigue weighing on his shoulders, and clicked open his inbox one last time before surrendering to sleep. At first, everything seemed ordinary, the usual newsletters, work reminders, and spam emails. But then his eyes caught something that made his heart stop. The sender's name was his own, Ethan R. The subject line read, "Do not ignore this." He froze, staring at the screen. His cursor hovered over the message. Sweat prickled the back of his neck. He hadn't written this email. He would have remembered. No one else could have sent it. Not his coworkers. Not anyone. With trembling hands, he clicked it open. The message was simple. Almost unnervingly so. Everything you think you know is about to change. Trust no one. Read carefully. There was nothing else. No attachments, no links, no signature beyond his own name. Just that line. Ethan leaned back in his chair, breathing fast. He scanned the email again. Could it be a hack? But the sender's address was identical to his own personal email, the one he'd used for a decade. It had to be fake, but something about it felt impossibly precise, deliberate. He opened his calendar. Today's date was March 12, 2025. He checked the email headers and his stomach dropped. The sent date on the email read, March 12, 2035. 10 years in the future. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. Surely, it was a glitch. A technical error. But the address, the phrasing, the faint echo of his own voice in the words, it all screamed him. The rain intensified outside, tapping against the window like frantic fingers. The lights flickered, then steadied. Ethan's phone buzzed. He picked it up and saw a notification, new email received. He opened it. It was the same email. His pulse quickened. He pressed the reply button, hesitated, then typed, "Who is this?" and hit send. The screen blinked, and then nothing. No response. No error message. Just silence. A chill crept down his spine. His apartment suddenly felt smaller, more suffocating. Every shadow seemed darker, every corner deeper. He glanced at the window. For a brief moment, he thought he saw someone standing outside, just beyond the rain-slicked streetlight. But when he blinked, nothing was there. Ethan sank into his chair, hands shaking. He stared at the email. Who could have sent it? And why did it feel like a warning? Like someone, or something, knew exactly what was coming? He leaned forward again, rereading the single line, "Everything you think you know is about to change." A low rumble of thunder echoed through the city. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. What was about to change? And more importantly, could he prevent it? Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time, a small attachment appeared, a blurry image. He tapped it open. It was a photograph of his own apartment, empty, silent, except for a figure standing in the hallway. The figure's face was hidden in shadow, but Ethan knew instinctively it was him. He gasped, almost dropping the phone. Rain pounded harder on the window, as though matching his racing heartbeat. The message was clear. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a mistake. Someone, or something, was trying to tell him the future. Ethan sat frozen at his desk, staring at the photograph on his phone. The figure in the hallway was unmistakably him, yet wrong. The shadow obscured the features, but the posture, the stance, even the tilt of the head, mirrored his own. He swallowed hard, trying to calm the rapid thump of his heart. Rain continued to lash against the windows, casting flickering reflections across the floor. He reread the email, word by word, desperate for a clue he might have missed. Everything you think you know is about to change. Trust no one. Read carefully. Those words looped endlessly in his mind, each repetition heavier than the last. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through the message again, noticing tiny quirks in the phrasing, commas, spacing, and punctuation that were distinctly his own. Words he didn't consciously remember writing. Okay, he whispered to himself. Okay, it's just a glitch. A coincidence. Maybe a hack. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. His email credentials were secure, his passwords long and complicated. No one should have been able to send this, and certainly not from 10 years in the future. The room grew colder. Ethan rubbed his arms, trying to shake the sensation of being watched. Then came the faint sound of movement, a slow, deliberate scrape against the window behind him. He spun around, but the street was empty, blurred by the rain and the reflection of the dim streetlight. His pulse quickened. "Who's there?" he called, though his own voice sounded brittle, small against the downpour. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the tapping of raindrops answered. Ethan turned back to the email, hoping some rational explanation would appear, but the screen seemed almost alive. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched and shifted with the flickering light. He felt the unmistakable sensation of someone standing just behind him. He checked the hallway. Empty. Yet the chill persisted. It was as if the photograph had crossed the boundary of the screen into reality. His chest tightened. A sudden notification pinged. Another email. From himself. Dated again, 10 years in the future. He opened it carefully. The subject line, "Do not wait." Inside, just a few words. "Step outside. You will understand." Ethan's mind raced. Was this a trap? A warning? He glanced toward the door, hesitated, then glanced back at the email. The previous photograph flashed in his mind, the shadowy figure standing in the hallway. Something was trying to lead him somewhere. Something he couldn't ignore. He grabbed his coat, pocketing his phone. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last, as if invisible hands pressed on his shoulders. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the window frames, and the streetlight outside flickered like a heartbeat. As he opened the door and stepped onto the wet pavement, Ethan squinted through the sheets of rain. The street was empty, too empty. But he could feel it, a presence just beyond his sight. A chill ran down his spine as he realized, whatever had sent these messages was closer than he thought. Then, from the shadows across the street, a figure emerged. Still hidden beneath, Ethan's coat clung to him, soaked through, as he stared across the empty street. The shadowy figure had vanished into the night, leaving only the whisper of rain against the pavement. His phone buzzed again. Another email, identical to the first two, time-stamped exactly 10 years ahead. He backed up against the cold brick wall of his apartment building and opened the email. The header lines were meticulously detailed. IP address, routing path, even the server it claimed to originate from. Every detail checked out. Except, it shouldn't have. The sent date stared back at him, March 12, 2035. 10 years from now. 10 years. The mind cannot process such a contradiction. He rubbed his temples, his fingers trembling. "This isn't real," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "It can't be real." But everything about it was convincing. The metadata, the unique phrasing, even the tiny idiosyncrasies of punctuation and spacing he recognized as his own. Someone, or something, had sent him this message from the future. He scrolled to the bottom of the email. No attachments this time, just one line. "Check the date on the calendar." His eyes darted toward the wall calendar hanging crookedly in the kitchen. March 2025. Nothing unusual. But when he reached out and flipped the page to the next day, the date changed to March 12, 2035. Ethan froze. The numbers glowed faintly in the dim light of the street lamp outside. 10 years ahead. A chill ran down his spine, and his breath came out in small, misty clouds. He backed away from the calendar and dropped to his knees, trying to ground himself in reality. His eyes searched the street, the rain, the shadows, anything to anchor him. The street light flickered violently. Ethan's phone buzzed again, this time a notification from his calendar app, event scheduled. "You will see yourself tonight." He froze. The rain blurred against the window behind him, streaking downward like tears. He didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run. Logic had no hold here. Time itself seemed to bend and twist around him. A sudden movement caught his eye. Across the street, a figure stood beneath the faint glow of a flickering street lamp. He couldn't make out the face, but the posture, the tilt of the head, the casual way the arms hung, felt intimately familiar. Too familiar. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. Could it be him? No, impossible. Yet everything, every instinct in his body, screamed that this figure was connected to him in ways he could not comprehend. The emails, the timestamp, the glowing date on the calendar, it all pointed to one conclusion. The future was trying to communicate with him. And whoever, or what, Ethan's apartment felt heavier than usual. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving a damp chill in the air. He closed the door behind him, shaking off water from his coat, and noticed something odd on the floor near the bookshelf. A dusty, leather-bound journal he didn't remember owning. Curious and cautious, he knelt to pick it up. The leather was worn, the pages yellowed with age, but the cover bore a single inscription in neat, familiar handwriting: R. His initials. A shiver ran down his spine. Could this belong to him? But he didn't recall writing it. Not 10 years ago. Not ever. Ethan flipped it open to the first page. His eyes widened. The handwriting inside matched the email, the unique spacing, the careful punctuation, the subtle quirks he recognized as distinctly his. But the dates at the top of each page were years he hadn't lived yet: 2027, 2029, 2030. The first entry was brief, almost cryptic. It begins tonight. Do not ignore the signs. The shadows are closer than they appear. He frowned, turning page after page. Each entry described events that hadn't happened, events that now eerily mirrored the emails he had received. The journal spoke of small, seemingly insignificant moments. A streetlight flickering, rain tapping against a window, a shadow across the street, that now seemed loaded with meaning. He flipped further and froze. One entry was dated today, March 12, 2025. It described him sitting at his desk, opening an email from the future, and seeing a shadowy figure in his hallway. Every word was exactly what had happened, almost like someone had been watching him. Ethan's pulse quickened. His mind raced. How could this journal exist? How could it predict what had already occurred, almost moment by moment? A sudden noise made him jump, the faint creak of the apartment door behind him. He whipped around, but the hallway was empty. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the distant dripping of water filled the silence. He returned to the journal, scanning frantically. One final entry at the end of the book caught his eye. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. He's closer than you think. Tonight, you must make a choice. The future depends on it. Ethan swallowed hard. The shadows, the emails, the time-stamped events, they were all connected. Someone or something was orchestrating this, guiding him, warning him. But what? And how could he trust it? His phone buzzed again, jolting him. Another email, same date 10 years ahead, subject line: read the journal carefully. He stared at the phone, the journal open in front of him, and realized the truth. He couldn't ignore this. The future, somehow, had reached out to him. Ethan stood abruptly, heart racing. The journal, the emails, the shadows, it was all leading him somewhere. And the weight of the moment pressed on him like a storm cloud, heavy and unrelenting. Gripping the leather-bound journal tightly, he knew one thing. He had to follow the clues. Whatever the future wanted him to see, he couldn't hesitate. Outside, the streetlights flickered again. Ethan stepped out into the rain-soaked street, the journal clutched tightly against his chest. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the faint smell of wet asphalt and distant smoke. Streetlights flickered, throwing long shadows across the sidewalk. Every step he took felt amplified in the silence, the sound of his shoes echoing like gunshots. He scanned the street, searching for any sign of the figure he had glimpsed earlier. For a moment, it seemed as if the night itself had swallowed everything whole. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed movement, a dark silhouette leaning against the far wall of the alley across the street. Ethan froze, the rain dripping from the brim of his hood. The figure didn't move. It didn't breathe. Yet, instinctively, he knew it was watching him, studying him with an intimacy that felt unnatural. Something about the posture, the slight tilt of the head, sent a shiver down his spine. He took a tentative step forward. The figure mirrored him. Ethan's heart pounded. He stopped. The stranger stopped. He moved left. The figure mirrored him. Every movement he made was copied perfectly, almost as if he were facing his own reflection in the darkness. "Who are you?" he called out, his voice cutting through the rain. No response. Only the whisper of raindrops and the occasional rumble of thunder. Ethan's mind raced. The emails, the journal, the time-stamped messages, they had all led to this moment. And now, in the wet emptiness of the street, he realized this wasn't a coincidence. This stranger knew him, knew everything about him, knew the smallest details of his life. The figure took a step closer. Ethan felt a strange familiarity in the movement, a disturbing sense of recognition that made his stomach churn. His mind flashed back to the photograph from the first email, the shadow in his hallway. Could it be the same presence? Or something even worse? A gust of wind blew through the street, sending loose papers from the journal fluttering to the ground. Ethan bent down to gather them, but when he looked up, the stranger was gone. The rain blurred the street, turning the world into a gray, shimmering haze. Yet, Ethan knew it hadn't vanished. It was waiting, watching. He continued down the street cautiously, following an instinct he didn't fully understand. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner a potential hiding place. The city felt different tonight, as if the world itself had shifted, revealing layers he had never noticed before. Then, near an old, abandoned storefront, Ethan saw something that made him stop cold. A black envelope lay on the wet pavement, perfectly intact despite the rain. He bent down and picked it up. There was no writing, no return address, just the weight of inevitability. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed but unmistakably in his own handwriting. The words were chilling in their simplicity. "You're closer than you think. The next step is beneath your feet." Ethan's breath caught. The journal, the emails, the figure in the shadows. It all pointed to one place, somewhere hidden, somewhere beneath him. He looked back at the street. Empty. Silent. Yet the feeling of being watched lingered, pressing down on him like a living thing. The rain fell harder now, drumming a frantic rhythm on the pavement. Ethan knew he had no choice. The next step, whatever it was, lay in the unknown, somewhere beneath the floorboards of his own apartment, waiting for him to uncover it. He tucked the envelope into his coat and began the long walk home, heart hammering, mind racing. Every instinct screamed that tonight, the shadows were leading him to a truth he wasn't ready for. Ethan pushed open the door to his apartment, the familiar creak echoing through the empty hallway. Rain dripped from his coat onto the hardwood floor, pooling around his shoes. He paused, feeling the weight of the black envelope pressing against his chest. Something about it felt heavier than its physical weight, as if it carried a presence of its own. He set it on the table and stared at it. No return address. No markings. Just the ominous black paper, smooth and unyielding. A shiver ran down his spine as he reached for it. The envelope trembled slightly in his hand, though there was no wind. Ethan swallowed hard. He tore it open carefully, revealing a single sheet of paper inside. His eyes widened. The handwriting was unmistakably his own, yet somehow different, older, deliberate. "Meet me at the park at midnight. You have to see it for yourself." No signature. No explanation. Just a directive, simple, chilling, and undeniably urgent. Ethan's mind raced. He flipped the paper over, hoping for more clues, more context. Nothing. Just the faint scent of ink and paper. But the handwriting, the tone, the insistence, it was as if someone from the future, or perhaps another version of himself, was speaking directly to him. He sank into a chair, gripping the edges of the envelope. Questions flooded his mind. Who was sending these messages? Why? And how could this even be possible? The emails, the photograph, the journal, and now this, it was all pointing toward one moment in time, one meeting he couldn't ignore. A sudden knock at the window made him jump. Heart-hammering, Ethan glanced over, but the street was empty. The rain shimmered under the flickering streetlight. Nothing. Yet the sensation of being watched persisted, crawling over his skin like icy fingers. Ethan set the envelope down, running a hand through his damp hair. He tried to rationalize. Perhaps someone was playing a cruel game. But every instinct, every memory of the past few days, screamed otherwise. This was no prank. This was a warning. He glanced at his phone. Midnight was hours away, but the park wasn't far. He could walk there, follow the instructions, and perhaps finally understand the messages that had haunted him for days. Ethan's breathing grew shallow. The journal, the emails, the shadows in the street, they had all led him to this moment. And now, holding this envelope, he realized the path was no longer optional. A low rumble of thunder shook the windows. Rain drummed a steady rhythm, echoing the racing of his heartbeat. The city outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching, as if aware of the choice he was about to make. He grabbed his coat, sliding the envelope carefully into the inner pocket. Every step he took toward the door felt like a step into a different reality. One in which the ordinary rules no longer applied, and time itself seemed fragile, bending around him. Ethan hesitated at the threshold, hand on the doorknob. For a fleeting moment, fear threatened to paralyze him. But the envelope, Ethan's footsteps splashed through the puddles on the deserted streets as he approached the park. The city was muted, the rain turning everything into a blur of dim streetlights and shadowy outlines. Each flash of lightning revealed the skeletal branches of the trees, swaying like dark fingers above him. The envelope pressed against his chest, a strange warmth radiating from it, as if guiding him forward. The park was empty, save for a single figure standing under a flickering lamppost near the fountain. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The silhouette was tall, broad-shouldered, yet somehow familiar. His pulse thundered in his ears as he stepped closer, the wet gravel crunching underfoot. "Who are you?" Ethan called, his voice trembling. The figure slowly turned. Lightning illuminated the face for a brief instant. Ethan froze. It was him. Or at least, it looked exactly like him, older, lines etched around the eyes, hair streaked with gray, a subtle weariness in the shoulders. His own eyes stared back at him. "Ethan," the figure said, voice low but unmistakably his own. "I've been waiting for you." Ethan stumbled back a step, clutching the envelope. This isn't possible. You're me. But how?" The older Ethan took a slow step forward, rain dripping from the brim of his coat. "I come from the future. 10 years ahead. I sent you the emails. I left the journal. Every warning, every message. It's all to bring you here tonight." Ethan's mind raced. A part of him wanted to run, to deny what his senses screamed. Yet the envelope, the emails, the journal, all had led him here. And now, looking at this version of himself, he felt the truth settle in his bones. "Why me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why now?" The older Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph, handing it to him. The picture was of a building engulfed in flames, chaos frozen in time. "This," he said, "is what happens if you fail. If you ignore the warnings. You have to stop it." Ethan's hands trembled as he stared at the photo. The flames reflected in his own eyes, the heat almost tangible despite the rain. "I don't understand. How can I prevent this?" The older Ethan's expression softened. "You have to trust yourself. Every choice you've made, every instinct, has led you here. You were meant to see this, to act before it's too late." Ethan swallowed hard, trying to steady his racing heart. A gust of wind rattled the lamppost above, and the rain poured harder, masking the world in a silver blur. The park felt suspended in time, a liminal space between the present and the future. "Remember," the older Ethan said, taking a step back. "The clock is already ticking. You cannot hesitate. What you do tonight determines everything." Ethan nodded, gripping the envelope tighter, the weight of responsibility settling over him like a storm cloud. The older version of himself gave one last glance, then faded into the shadows as if swallowed by the night, leaving Ethan alone in the rain. The future was now entirely in his hands. He took a deep breath, staring at the photograph again, the journal and emails echoing in his mind. Whatever he had to do, it had to be done, and quickly. Ethan stood in the middle of the deserted park, rain soaking through his coat, heart hammering as he stared at the photograph of the burning building. The memory of his older self's words reverberated in his mind. The clock is already ticking. You cannot hesitate. He clenched the journal in one hand, the envelope in the other, feeling the weight of the future pressing down on him. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting fractured shadows that danced across the wet pavement. Every sound was amplified, the distant hum of traffic, the patter of rain, even the rustle of leaves in the trees. He felt watched, as if the park itself was alive, anticipating his next move. Ethan opened the journal, flipping to the page marked with the most recent entry. His eyes scanned the words, written in his future handwriting. The loop can be broken, but only if he chooses differently. Hesitation will destroy everything. He shivered. The loop. That's what it was, the endless cycle of warnings, emails, and shadows, each event mirroring the next. Time itself seemed fractured, as if the universe was bending to force him into a specific path. But the journal promised an escape, a way to rewrite what had been set in motion. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, letting the cold rain run down his face. Logic and fear warred inside him, but instinct began to take over. He knew the first step. He had to confront the source, the origin of the messages, the place where the loop began. Ethan sprinted across the park toward the fountain where his older self had appeared. The wind whipped at him, rain lashing against his face, but he didn't stop. Each step felt like breaking through invisible chains, pulling him closer to the truth. When he reached the fountain, he noticed something he had missed before, a trapdoor beneath the stone base, partially obscured by shadows. His pulse quickened. The journal had hinted at this, something hidden beneath his feet. He knelt, fingers trembling, and lifted the cold, heavy cover. A faint creak echoed as the door opened, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Ethan swallowed. There was no turning back. Every instinct screamed danger, but the emails, the journal, the photograph, all pointed downward. With the envelope and journal tucked under his arm, he stepped into the blackness. The stairs spiraled down, damp and narrow, the walls slick with moisture. Ethan's flashlight flickered briefly, illuminating strange markings on the stone, arrows, dates, symbols he didn't understand, yet felt drawn to follow. Every step felt like crossing a boundary, a bridge between what was and what could be. At the bottom, he entered a small chamber. The air was thick and cold. In the center sat a console, an array of blinking screens displaying images from his apartment, emails, and timestamps, the very messages that had led him here. It was a control center for the loop. Ethan realized the truth. This was where the cycle began, and this was where he could end it. The emails, the photograph, the journal, all emanated from this room, feeding the past to the present, forcing events into repetition. He approached the console, fingers hovering over the keys. His heart raced. One decision could change everything. One choice could shatter the loop, or doom it to continue. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the chamber through a small grate. Ethan took a deep breath, gripping the envelope tightly. He pressed a single key, initiating the process. The screens flickered, the emails disappeared, the timestamps collapsed. Silence fell. The storm outside softened to a drizzle. Ethan exhaled, realizing the loop had been broken, but at what cost? Ethan emerged from the underground chamber, blinking against the softened rain. The storm had calmed to a light drizzle, leaving the streets glistening under the flickering lamplight. For the first time in days, he felt a strange stillness, a pause in the chaos that had consumed his life. The emails, the journal, the messages from the future, all had vanished. The loop was broken. He walked slowly toward his apartment, the wet pavement reflecting the dim orange glow of streetlights. Every step felt heavy, weighted with the knowledge of what had transpired. The world around him seemed normal again, yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted deep within the fabric of reality. He reached his door, paused, and looked back at the park where it had all begun. The fountain was empty, shadows gone. No trace remained of the figure who had been him from the future. Inside, his apartment smelled faintly of rain and wet leather. The journal sat on the table, open but blank, as if all the warnings, the messages, and the intricate timeline had been erased. The envelope was gone too, leaving only the faint outline of where it had rested. Ethan sank into his chair, exhausted but alive, a mixture of relief and lingering unease washing over him. He turned on his phone. No new emails. No notifications. Only the usual messages from friends and colleagues, mundane and ordinary. It was almost boring. Yet in the silence, Ethan could feel the weight of what had been accomplished. He had faced the impossible, stared into the future, and chosen differently. He had broken the cycle. The photograph of the burning building he had seen at the park was gone from the console in the chamber. Perhaps it had never truly existed, only a projection of what might have been. Yet the lesson remained. Every choice mattered. Every hesitation could ripple through time in ways he could never predict. Ethan stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. The streetlights glimmered on puddles, distant cars hummed along wet roads, and the faint smell of rain lingered in the air. The night was calm. The shadows no longer seemed threatening. For the first time, he felt a cautious sense of peace. But peace was fragile. Ethan knew the future was never fixed. Time could bend again, events could unfold unpredictably, and choices would always matter. He could only move forward, armed with the knowledge that he had faced the unknown and emerged stronger. A soft knock at the door startled him. He approached cautiously, heart still racing. Opening it, he found an ordinary letter, slipped beneath the threshold. No handwriting he recognized. No instructions. Just a single word on the front. Remember. Ethan picked it up, turning it over in his hands. A shiver ran down his spine, not of fear, but of awareness. The message was simple, yet powerful. The lessons of the past, the warnings, and the choices he had made were not to be forgotten. He set the letter down, exhaling slowly. The storm had passed, the emails were gone, the loop was broken. And yet, he knew that life would never be entirely ordinary again. Something fundamental had changed, in the world, in time, and in himself. Ethan sank into his chair once more, looking at the journal and the quiet city beyond his window. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to breathe. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was finally his to shape.